The Louvre Heist, the untold story of the stolen royal jewels, and why they matter. On a quiet morning in Paris, something happened that most people will never fully understand, not because it was hidden, but because the true loss can't be measured in diamonds. It can only be felt. When 8 royal jewels vanished from the Louvre, the world focused on the heist. But the real story begins after the glass shatters. A story about erasure, silence, and the fragile line between beauty and oblivion. Among those treasures was a diamond bow brooch, shimmering with more than 2,000 stones, a masterpiece woven in light, designed to look delicate but carrying the weight of an empire. And its disappearance raises a question far more unsettling than who stole it. It's what happens to history when its most luminous symbols are cut apart, melted down, or quietly erased. Stay with me until the end, because the answer changes how we see every jewel we've ever loved. There are moments in history when beauty becomes more than decoration, when a jewel stops being an accessory and turns into a witness to power, to survival, to the inner world of the women who once wore it. In museums, these pieces rest behind glass as if protected by time, yet their true fragility remains hidden. We see brilliance, we rarely see the stories. We admire craftsmanship. We forget the human lives intertwined with every stone. Some jewels traveled through courts and coronations. Others survived revolutions, exile, or the quiet loneliness of arranged marriages. Each one carries emotional fingerprints we can't see but somehow feel. Traces of joy, duty, fear, longing. That is the secret language of jewelry. It remembers what history tries to simplify. And so, when a jewel vanishes, the loss is deeper than the sparkle we no longer see. A thread connecting us to another era is severed. A voice once preserved in metal and light fades. What disappears is not just beauty, but memory. Today, we return to one of the most haunting events in recent museum history. Not to glorify a crime, but to understand what is truly at stake when a masterpiece is taken from the world. Because when a jewel is lost, a story is lost with it. A brooch adorned with 2,634 diamonds, a quiet symbol of fragility, power, and irreplaceable history. There are jewels that are admired for their beauty, and there are jewels that carry the weight of a life. The diamond bow brooch stolen from the Louvre belongs to the second kind. At first glance, it seems delicate, almost soft, almost gentle, a ribbon crafted in light. But behind its shimmering surface lies a story tied to an empress who once navigated the most treacherous rooms of an empire. She stood beside a ruler whose world revolved around politics, image, and power. And in that world, ornaments were never just ornaments. They were armor. This brooch, with more than 2,000 carefully set diamonds, was created to be worn close to the heart. Its shape suggests grace, its construction is pure discipline. It reflects the duality of the woman who wore it, elegant on the outside, unbreakable beneath the surface. And that is why its disappearance cuts deeper than the loss of gemstones. When a piece like this vanishes, the woman behind it vanishes a little too. Her voice muted, her presence reduced to a footnote, her legacy turned fragile. But the real tragedy is what happens after the theft. Most people imagine thieves stealing jewels to wear or sell intact. The truth is far darker. Pieces this famous cannot survive in their original form. The diamonds are dismantled, recut, melted into anonymity. Their provenance, the very element that makes them irreplaceable, becomes a liability. And with every cut of the blade, a chapter of history disappears. Why does this matter? Because jewels like this are not symbols of wealth. They are symbols of memory. They remind us that beauty has survived wars, revolutions, exile, until someone decides it shouldn't. And this is only the beginning of what vanished that morning. If you love the emotional meaning behind jewelry, subscribe to stay for the next chapters. The emerald necklace of Empress Maria Louisa, emotional power, imperial aura, and feminine memory. Among the jewels threatened by silence, few carry an aura as intimate and regal as the emerald necklace designed for Empress Maria Louisa, a woman who entered one of the most calculated marriages in European history. She was chosen to stand beside Napoleon not for love, but for stability, a living emblem of alliance, lineage, and the future of an empire. And into her jewelry, artisans poured what she herself could not freely express: devotion, vulnerability, longing, fear. Her emerald parure, 32 stones framed by more than 1,000 diamonds, was more than a display of imperial opulence. It was a vessel of emotion, a silent record of a young empress learning to navigate a life where every gesture was watched, every word weighed, every appearance choreographed for political effect. Emeralds, with their deep and meditative green, have always carried a quiet intensity. They reflect renewal, intuition, and the internal strength required to exist with grace under pressure. For Maria Luisa, wearing these jewels was less about being seen and more about being held. Each stone mirrored a part of her reality, a woman expected to embody elegance while managing the complexity of a marriage arranged for the fate of nations. This is the emotional truth often forgotten in discussions of royal jewelry, that behind every masterpiece stood a woman balancing duty and identity in the most delicate way. And this is why the disappearance of pieces like hers is not simply a loss of beauty. It is the unraveling of a personal history. A fragment of her life, her world, her presence gone. Yet the story grows even darker, because once such jewels leave the protection of a museum, their survival becomes a race against time. Why these jewels matter and the deeper meaning behind their loss. When royal jewels disappear, the world imagines thieves passing them from hand to hand like trophies. But in reality, the fate of most stolen masterpieces is far more devastating. Pieces of this magnitude are too recognizable to survive intact. They enter a hidden world, a network where beauty is dismantled for anonymity and history is sacrificed for profit. Within days, diamonds can be removed from their settings, emeralds recut into smaller stones, metalwork melted into faceless bars of gold. In that transformation, something far greater is lost than craft. Because when a jewel is destroyed, the woman behind it disappears with it. A brooch worn by an empress, an emerald necklace crafted for a young bride entering a life she never chose. These were not ornaments, they were emotional archives. They carried fingerprints of moments, ceremonies, alliances, whispered fears, quiet hopes. They held the weight of decisions that shaped nations and the interior worlds of women who rarely had the freedom to speak for themselves. This is why the Louvre Heist matters. Not simply because jewels vanished, but because the stories anchored to them are now hanging by a thread. And every time a piece like this dissolves into anonymity, we lose a part of our shared memory, the kind that connects us to the women who came before us, the artisans who created for them, and the eras they survived. Jewelry, at its highest form, is not decoration. It is preservation. It reminds us of who we were, who we loved, what we endured, and what still glows inside us despite everything that tried to dim it. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, which jewel story should never be forgotten?